Hey everyone, welcome to Group Text. Let's be really super honest here. I know a thing or two about daughters working with their mothers, and there was not a more iconic duo in country music than Naomi and Wynonna Judd. Alexandra Dean has directed a riveting new four-part docuseries entitled The Judd Family, Truth Be Told, which airs May 10th and 11th on Lifetime. In it, Alexandra explores not just the fame the Judds found with their gorgeous harmonies and heartfelt lyrics, but also the generational trauma that all of the Judd women suffered quite publicly. Alexandra, welcome to Group Text. So, right off the bat, did you know Wynonna and Ashley before you did this series?
I didn't. Ashley asked to meet me, and so we spent quite a long time talking. And Melissa, I'll tell you what struck me was she asked me to talk about myself. I think I talked for like 10 minutes or something, telling her my background, telling her why I was interested in the doc, and she repeated what I said back to me verbatim.
Oh, she's brilliantly smart. People
Oh
don't
my
realize
God.
about her. She was Phi Beta Kappa. I mean, she's a very speaks multiple languages. I have been around her a few times. People don't get how smart she is. Like,
Like, oh my God, nobody's ever done that in my life.
right. Now, did you want to do the doc and reached out to her, or did she want a doc made about the family and reached out to you?
It was somewhere in between. The production company had come up with the idea of the doc and kind of approached Naomi's foundation. Ashley came on board as, a participant, and I came on board because they approached me to be the director. But it was a no-brainer for me, Melissa. It was like,
Like,
who wouldn't want to do a documentary on the Judds?
well, I was gonna say, what made you want to tell their story? But I think you just answered that. Did you have any idea until you started digging what the real story was? Because literally, it's fascinating and incredibly tragic.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't. I really didn't know the full story. I don't think I'm going to hazard a guess and say no one really knows the whole story yet.
No, no.
Because it took us putting it together. I think it started to form as we researched it and we did the interviews. It was like, oh my God. I think what people don't realize, of course, is the depth of the trauma that Naomi was in. That's the
It
truth.
it was shocking. How did you establish the trust? Because I always feel like in these documentaries, there has to be a tremendous amount of trust between the people participating and the storyteller. So
Yeah,
you met Ashley.
yeah.
Who did you meet Wynonna next?
I didn't. It didn't go that way. I don't think Wynonna knew if she was going to participate for a while, so she hung back. And Ashley and Larry and I met for that first scene you see in the doc series where we're actually in the house as they're packing it up and saying goodbye to it. And of course, Larry and Ashley have this moment in Naomi's room of, total grief. And, I think that was kind of a weird way to begin filming, obviously. It
It's a
felt
heavy,
very painful.
it's a heavy first day.
Actually,
Ah!
I was using the makeup artist again. He was
Yeah.
like, I can't believe how heavy that was as the first day. But I think it did bond us right away. And I think Ashley had a lot of questions about how we were going to handle that very difficult question of her mother's death. And I think we demonstrated that day that we were going to handle it sensitively and we were going to follow her lead, and we did.
It was okay. Let's just dive into Naomi for a second and how traumatic her childhood was. So, first of all, molested at age 3.
3,
No one believed her
gaslit about it in her family.
and her family. The brother who she was very close to, while he's dying, she gets pregnant, and it's very honest in the movie. No one even knows why. She wasn't a wild child. Why, in the midst of all this, she decides to not just have sex with one man, but we find out later with two in a very close period of time.
Well, actually, Melissa, we don't get into this in the talk because there wasn't time, but I'll tell you that she didn't really have sex with the second guy. It's just that they were so innocent at that time that she did convince that second guy that he was the dad, even though it wasn't physically possible.
Okay, and they never even explain really why she did that to him, because it was almost like, and the verbiage I'm going to use isn't great. It
Yeah.
was almost like he became the fall guy, and
Yeah.
his whole life was turned upside down,
Yeah.
and you don't see a
Fair.
lot of remorse from her.
Yeah. Well, so that's a really great question. And I think I've done a lot of films recently on women in trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a complicated thing that we think we know, but we don't really get it.
No,
You know, when you're in real PTSD, we don't really get what that looks like.
no.
And Naomi was in PTSD. When she got pregnant, her mom locked and barred the door on her, so there was no home to go to. She had no penny to her name. She was in panic mode, and she had been traumatized from the age of 3. She had been raped. So what does a girl in that situation do? And it was any port in a storm. And
Yeah.
this guy had been promising and everything to her and offering her marriage. He was a port in the storm.
At first, when I was watching it, I felt really horrible about how her mom handled this. But then when you take a step back, you also realize the brother was dying.
Yeah.
They were a very straight list, nice middle class family that you didn't discuss things. These things didn't happen.
Right.
And I was talking to someone about it. I was like, we also forget that at that time, dying from cancer was agonizingly painful. They did not have the drugs that we have now. So on one hand, you're like, how could your mother do that? But when you share that she said, I can't have a baby in the house right now, when you really think about it, you're like, did they handle it poorly? Yes, but you kind of get it.
Yeah. That's right, Melissa. And then also layer on top of that, what we find out, I think, an episode or two later, which is that the mom herself had this totally crazy mother who
Yes.
actually, may have killed her father and all of this craziness. So she herself was traumatized. She has Naomi at 14. So we're seeing what we now call generational trauma. And
Yeah.
it's a snowball that picks up momentum, right? So Naomi is just hit in the head with all of this. And she doesn't know what to do with it. And she messes up, frankly. The early years with the girls are not pretty.
No, not pretty at all. She eventually goes to California. She does have a child with this guy. That's
Yeah.
Ashley.
Right.
But then that doesn't work out. So she takes off to California, has a series of bad relationships. Doesn't really feel like the most present mother.
No, she's trying to
Well,
work and figure herself out. Yeah. She's a baby, Melissa, right?
Yeah.
She's a baby herself. That's what we forget. She never figured herself out. She's been in trauma since she was 19. She has these 2 tiny babies, and she doesn't act like a mom at all. She acts like a teenager still on the hunt for the perfect partner and somebody out in Hollywood hoping, to become maybe an actress or a model.
Yeah, and kind of almost already farming the girls out, like, to the neighbors so she could go out, which then leads to a whole other, I don't want to give stuff away, a whole other set of trauma.
Yeah.
When she changes their names, because they were Diana and Chris, and Ashley remained Ashley, which I think is also fascinating.
Isn't it?
To me, it felt like she was running from that part of her past.
Yes, she wanted to cut it off.
And here's this one daughter, Chris, also, who now became one thing I found really poignant was when Ashley's talking about how to learn how to spell her mother and her sister's new names.
Yeah. Wynonna and getting it wrong,
But now, why didn't she change Ashley's name?
I think there was some talk about Ashley's name getting changed, and Ashley just didn't want that.
Yeah.
Which you can see now in Ashley's character.
Yeah, you see it now, but I found that to be such an interesting moment of her accepting where her life was versus running from the past.
Yeah. Ashley is such a different character from her mother and sister, And of course, Wynonna and Naomi are almost diametrically opposed characters. So you've got these 3 women that at some point I was thinking of them as like mythological 3 graces,
Yeah.
Powerful, each with their own extraordinary talent, but the talents are different and the personalities are incredibly different.
Naomi realizes that Wynonna has this massive talent, and they go off to Nashville, and she's pushing Wynonna, and she's pushing Wynonna, and she's pushing Wynonna, yet it felt like just on the precipice, Naomi almost couldn't let her have her own fame. That she had this need to be a part of it and get the attention. And her friends from high school talk about she always had to be the center of attention.
Yes. I think that was definitely an element to it. When I looked a little closer at her journals and stuff, I also saw, Naomi was very controlling, and she felt like if she didn't stay in control, she couldn't ensure Wynonna's continued success. She couldn't let go.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of it too. But I think the other side of that is that Naomi also, we've talked about her not being a very good mother to the girls when they were small, not being equipped to be, but she had a way of mothering Wynonna that was really fascinating, and that had to do with their singing together.
Yes.
With this harmonizing, right?
It's where they could connect.
It's where they could connect. It's where she could bring the idea that she loved them, to them in this emotional way and really communicate it. And it was also this thing that was so fascinating to me was that she invented this blood harmony with Wynonna, which was not normal harmony.
Right.
It was going low and lifting the voice, almost underlining, underscoring it so that her daughter's voice punched out and hers sort of fell into the background. So while I think she kind of could be controlling and didn't let go very easily, she also did find this very unique way to highlight her daughter's talent and was always pushing her out in front. So that was a kind of mother's love.
Which is a very complicated love when you're performing, but that was the secret sauce, and you get into that. One was the brilliant musician, one was the performer.
Right.
And that became the secret sauce to the Judds.
Right.
One of the things you talk about is Naomi had this weird, and you see it all the time, way of kind of picking at Wynonna. If you lost 20 pounds, you could be a pop star. Let me do your hair. And that is so debilitating to someone who then has to go out in front of a stadium full of people.
Oh my God, I know. I know. And it is a thing moms do. I'm sure.
Tell me about it. We all know that.
We all know this.
But as a performer herself, and she became an incredible performer, Naomi, why didn't she pick up that she was hindering almost Wynonna's performance by doing that to her? Or did she really believe that she was doing the right thing? We all know that there was major psychological and mental issues from the very beginning. So did she have absolutely no realization that she was doing that?
I think she did know, she would chastise herself in her own notes and promise she wasn't going to do it again, and then she'd go and do it again. It's a pattern many of us know. Moms
Yes.
are compulsive about this with their daughters, especially. And there's an element of projection, right? She's definitely projecting onto Wynonna. She wants Wynonna to be so successful, but of course she wants to be successful. And she felt like she lost this childhood, because of Wynonna. And that makes her feel like Wynonna, I think on some subconscious level, she did feel Wynonna owed her that.
I never thought about that. That's fascinating. And poor Ashley at this point was basically thrown to the wolves.
Oh my God. That's the shocking thing.
A latchkey kid to the nth degree.
Right. Really, really abandoned.
Really completely abandoned and farmed out. And I found that fascinating because Naomi had been so abandoned that she then absolutely repeated history.
It's like she had a blind spot the size of a Mack truck.
Yeah.
Ashley was in that blind spot.
Yeah.
And it was just, Ashley's a genius. Ashley's amazing. She can look after herself. And you look at your notes and go, oh my God, she's talking about Ashley at 14 years old.
Yeah. Who lets their child go off at 14 to Japan with basically a stranger?
Yeah, absolutely. And the crazy thing is, it's not like Naomi was a stage mom who organized Japan.
No.
Ashley. She just left Ashley in a farmhouse, and Ashley met a guy who offered her this modeling career, and she took the risk of going off to Japan. And so it's an astounding level of abandonment, really. I struggled with it when I was making the film. I really I would ask Naomi at night, I would be asking her in my head, well, how can you do that? She's so little.
Well, especially because she had been so abandoned by
Yeah,
her mother.
yeah, and I think that's the answer, Melissa. When that's happened to you and your mother's been saying to you, you could look after yourself at 14. I had you at 14. You internalize that, right? Naomi internalized that and thought 14 is an appropriate age to go off and have babies. Why can't you look after yourself?
See, to me, that you would assume that would be the opposite, not repeating.
Oh, yeah. For me, too. I
Yeah.
mean, we're, I think, a generation that has a completely different reaction to this stuff. And we're like, we're not going to make these mistakes, but maybe to a fault. I don't know.
One of the things I also, how did Wynonna finally trust you?
I don't know. That would be a good question for her. I think she talked to Ashley, and I think once Ashley trusted me, Wynonna decided to trust me. And I'm so glad because I thought her interview was extraordinary.
She has an amazing level of self-awareness, which I was not expecting.
Right?
I was not expecting that at all. From where she is now, she has such an amazingly clear picture of who she is and why she is the way she is and the decisions she made. And a lot of them, like being able to say, this is why I dress the way I do.
Right.
This is why I eat.
Right.
This is this. And at a fairly young age, and really at the peak of their career, she had the clarity to say, I need help.
She did. It's her great strength. Wynonna seemed to always know when she needed help. And she sought it, not to say that her demons weren't, enormous anyway. I think they were. It was just such a difficult childhood. But she's always been very aware of what she's been going through and why. I think she hasn't had the time to work on it that Ashley has because she's had such a full-on career, Being near Wynonna is to realize she's never really left the road.
Yeah.
But she's done amazing work all the same.
But I found that so fascinating that her ability to figure out at the peak of their career going where everyone's yesing them,
Right.
where she can go, time out. I have a problem and I think I know what's causing it and I need to go and get help for it. It didn't seem like people were pushing her to go get help.
Well, you do see one person, and that's their musical director, Don Potter. He says, I think you need to go get help. Why? And he's been that figure in their lives. He's really an unsung hero in the Judds' lives. He was a domineering character. He was a gentle, very guiding character, very guiding light for the women, all three of them. And I think he always was there, quietly telling them on the bus, you need to go get some help.
Right. Well, because you talk about all the fights on the bus, but the level of professionalism, you can be screaming at each other and then walk on stage. I have personally experienced that.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I have done that. Luckily, that didn't happen a ton with us. But to be able to do it in front of these huge sold out crowds where you still have to be so aligned artistically.
Right.
That, to me, the fact that Wynonna at one point didn't turn around and just go, fuck you, I'm out. Because she was rebellious.
Yeah, she was rebellious.
That level of professionalism.
Yeah.
Did that come from Naomi or was that just ingrained?
Naomi demanded that level of professionalism. That did come from Naomi's instruction in many ways, but Wynonna also had an amazing level of devotion to her mother. And, she didn't walk away at times you'd think she would out of that devotion. Their relationship is so complicated. It's just as soon as you think you have your hands around it,
You don't.
Something else, and you don't. You have to have reverence for relationships like that.
Yeah.
It was a profound, profound love and devotion and a profound struggle at the same time.
I want to go back to the struggle for a minute. When Naomi completely creating a different narrative for their background, the only part that was still accurate was the word Kentucky.
Yeah. Yes, it was reinvented their whole background. Yeah.
And she felt the need to do this to get ahead, to make up this false narrative,
Well, I think,
and then burdening her daughters with this secret.
yeah, I think she was actually kind of a very talented PR person.
Mm-hmm.
And she understood from a very early time that they weren't going to break through out of nowhere. You know, even when Y was 16, 17, they were trying to sort of promote her as a single actress, single singer, sorry, a solo artist. And I think they were shocked to find that she didn't break through immediately. And so that's when Naomi starts, you know, those cogs start turning in her head, and she starts packaging them in a way she thinks will sell. And she doesn't really care too much about the truth when she's doing that packaging, let's be honest. She's just
Yeah.
like, what worked in my region? It was coal miner's daughter. Let's just redo it as
Yeah.
a mother-daughter thing, you know, rinse and repeat. And it did work, but it was really hard to live, you know, them for many decades, for 2 decades. Y's got to be on board with this and be telling everybody in every interview
Well,
that this is
and
different.
and so does Ashley.
And then so does Ashley. Yeah.
And that's such a heavy burden to bear, knowing that you are perpetuating basically a lie
Yeah.
for
She
the
knows.
sake of the family.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, if Naomi were sitting here with us, she'd say it wasn't lie so much as I tweaked the truth here, I tweaked the truth there. You know, she reframed things. So I don't want people thinking she kind of lied about them coming from Kentucky. They did come from Kentucky. She came
That
from
was about where it stopped.
that was, yeah. I mean, like, it wasn't this. She wasn't coal miner's daughter. She came from a middle class family. You know, they weren't, when they came back to Kentucky when the kids were little. It wasn't to, you know, the kind of classic dire poverty that she was framing it as. It was much more, you know, they were in an artist colony, having a wonderful kind of back to nature experience. However, what she was trying to get at, that Kentucky shaped them, that they really did feel like real Kentucky women from the soil. That's true. When you look at the archive, when you listen to the tapes, when you hear them singing to the hills and things, and when I talked to Ashley and Wynonna, it was so moving to hear how much Wynonna said Kentucky was a song to us. Kentucky sang to us. As a little girl, she said the taste of the water straight out of the well was a song. You can hear in Wynonna's voice how much this going back to the home place, going back to Kentucky did shape her.
It really is. It and the way you tell it is fascinating. So Naomi, I'm going to skip ahead, finds out she has Hep C.
Yeah.
And we never get told how she ended up with Hep C, which some people just get.
Yeah. She said it was because she was a nurse, right? And there was a stray needle.
Mm-hmm.
She was working as a nurse when she was young, and that's possible. We will never know.
Right. And this was back in the day before they had a lot of treatment for Hep C. We had someone who worked with us for years that had hepatitis C.
Is that right?
Yeah. And she went on, but she had been a huge partier. Like, she owned, I had this wild rock and roll past.
Right.
You know, this is very different. They put her on the interferon, which is, at the time especially, a very debilitating drug.
Oh yeah. Think like you got cancer and you're on last resort treatments, that kind of throw you on your back, you lose all your hair, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But that seemed to really kick Naomi's mental illness into high gear. There was something either manic or, I mean, there was always clearly something, and I don't like the word unstable, but unstable there. It wasn't just blind ambition and generational trauma. There was real mental illness.
There was mental illness. I would say it was dormant in periods of her life. And there were periods where it really showed up. And then after interferon, it becomes full blown.
Why did she avoid therapy? One of the great stories is the Smothers Brothers. They literally went to couples counseling together. Wynonna, isn't that wonderful?
So wonderful.
My mom and I used to, every now and again have check-ins with a therapist when we were at each other's throats. It's not uncommon. And Wynonna had openly gone and sought help.
Yeah.
Why was Naomi so almost resistant to it. She was taking all the meds for it and the depression and the what was clearly you see it bipolar and manic and all of that stuff. Why was she so afraid of actually going and talking to a therapist?
So there's a period where Ashley and Wynonna really confront her about that and sort of drag her into family therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of see it in the film. It becomes this sort of situation where Ashley and Wynonna are learning a lot about themselves, but Naomi doesn't seem to be learning anything, even though she's in this therapy setting. And so you get the sense that she's really resistant to therapy. And apparently there are people who aren't, they're just resistant. But I've got to believe, Melissa, that if you're raped at 3 and 4 years old, you don't have very good coping mechanisms.
No.
And you see this moment when she's in this family therapy where they invite her onto this chair to just kind of relive the moment of her brother's death. And she goes into this kind of fugue state where she's in shock, things are shattered in her psyche, she can't speak. And I think all the rest of it is getting kicked up about her childhood. And because it was never dealt with, it's all just under this volcanic rock. She either explodes and has to leave, or she can't speak at all. She's catatonic. And that's not very good for therapy.
No, that's not good to therapy. But then what it leads into is a different question is why didn't the therapist so much pull the girls aside and say, your mom needs real help?
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like a lot of her therapists talked to each other after her death and sort of interrogated each other. And I think the truth is people had tried in different ways to tell everyone, but nobody really cracked it. Nobody really found a way to talk to Naomi where she was being really honest with them about what had happened to her. And nobody helped Naomi and Wynonna communicate to each other their traumas properly. And that's really a shame. I think people tried, but it just didn't work. And it's really been painful building the documentary to see the tendrils, the moments where each of them really reached out and the other was not there, and then the same in the opposite direction. And I'm thinking, these are the women who wrote and sang Love Can Build a Bridge.
Yeah.
Why can't they walk that bridge to each other? Why can't they help each other? And it's just too complicated, too much trauma, too much distance.
You looked at the journals. Did Naomi realize something was wrong? Because a lot of time people who, go into mental illness and that kind of thing, they realize something's wrong, but they don't know either how to face it or cope with it. Did she ever have that self-awareness that she was losing her shit, basically?
Yeah, she really did. She wrote about it. Yeah, I mean, tragically, she really did know she was losing her shit. And she writes about these terrifying scenes where she's taking a gun out into the garden and unloading her gun into the trees just out of stress and trauma. So, and she owns how crazy that is. She wrote this whole book about mental illness, The End of Her Life, River of Time. And you really get a sense of how much she's been going through. But why not? Naomi did this thing that a lot of people do. I'm probably guilty of it. Everyone does it to some extent. Where if you have to write about your mental illness or whatever, you're like, that's in the past. Before I had figured everything out and I'm normal, this shit used to happen to me. Naomi would write about it like that when it was still really happening to her.
Well, what's fascinating, and I do a lot of advocacy for mental health, and my father had committed suicide, and I'm very much involved. I'm the co-chair of a board of a big mental health suicide prevention group.
Oh, wow.
So I looked at it at a lot of different levels when
Yeah.
I was watching it. You don't blindside someone in your own family with revelations in your book.
Right. Yeah.
And here's the thing is, Naomi was so smart. That's where and you see that with a lot of people with mental health issues. That split, plus sort of this made-up history, you would think you would say to your daughters, hey,
Yeah.
I'm telling the truth now. Heads up.
Yeah. I mean, look, Melissa, the bridge was broken. It was fractured and broken by that time. By the time Naomi wrote River of Time, where there are revelations for Wynonna to read that Wynonna didn't know. I mean, that at that time, the bridge was well and truly in shards, on the river floor.
Right.
And so this was her like last ditch attempt at building a bridge, and it wasn't very appropriate. And it was kind of back to that form of mothering we saw early on where, a lot of things were thrown at the kitchen wall to see if they stuck instead of really, the way that we all hope to mother today.
Yet
So,
they still kept performing.
well, yeah, that is amazing, isn't it?
They
In the
still
middle of
kept
a-
performing.
they kept performing, and they both talk about the fact that when they went on stage, suddenly it was all back.
Right.
The love was there, they felt they could communicate, and so they were both addicted to going on stage so that they could get back in that bubble and have that moment with each other, because the love was still all in the music.
One of the things you don't address, which I find interesting, and it makes sense much more now that I'm talking to you, was Ashley's accident.
Oh, Ashley's accident when she was going to see the bonobos.
Yes.
Yeah.
You never hear her talk about it or say, my mom and my sister came to my side.
You know what, Melissa? It was more a question of time. We didn't have time to cover the accident. We
Right.
didn't have time to cover a bunch of stuff. I mean, I would
Oh,
have needed a couple more episodes.
yeah. But I'm saying the fact that it didn't come up in this sort of saying,
Right.
and then at the end, Naomi showed up for Ashley, or
Right.
Wynonna flew to wherever she was and sent the plane for her and brought her back.
Right. I didn't see the accident as that moment. I mean, really, because Ashley herself identified the moment of coming back together with Naomi as this moment where she reached out to her mother first. And she apologized to her mother, even though she still had been living through all this rage about her childhood. She had this moment of like clarity and wisdom when she realized the only way I'm going to build the bridge to my mother is to say I'm sorry to her. And of course, as soon as she did that, Naomi broke down and apologized and crawled across the floor.
Which is the visual of that, and her telling that story,
Yeah,
is heartbreaking.
yeah, it
And
is.
I found myself wishing she had that moment with Wynonna.
Absolutely, me too. I could not believe they hadn't had the opportunity to have that. And of course, it's because Wise on the road the whole time. Ashley's
Right.
there.
So I want to skip ahead to the suicide, because it's something that I have personally experienced. Things that I found enlightening and interesting and puzzling. One is women generally do not shoot themselves in suicides,
Right, it's unusual.
especially in the head. If they do, it's usually in the chest.
Right,
She did it when her daughter, who she, I believe, did love, but had this whole healing with, left her, literally did it while her daughter was in the house and would have to deal with it. And the timing of it right before the Country Music Hall of Fame, in a very, and I was thinking about that overnight, took away, the timing took away allowing Wynonna to have the moment. Naomi was front and center again as the performer.
I don't see it that way, Melissa.
That's why I'm asking, because
Yeah,
that's how I saw it.
that's how you saw it. Yeah, I don't see it that way by the end. I'm gonna have to tell you something personal now. Will you bear with me? I'm gonna tell
Of
you.
course.
So while I was making this series, a very dear person to me committed suicide. And he committed suicide after going into a psychotic break.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real shock because this is somebody that I was working with at the time and seeing every week. And there was no indication that he was going to do that. And I had to learn about what is a psychotic break. And at the same time, Ashley's trying to tell me Naomi had a psychotic break. And Larry's saying it too, and there's this audio they didn't want me to play, but a haunting audio of her screaming. And I had to really get deeply into what is a psychotic break, and I started to realize how this can affect people. And I realized through the experience of my friend that it can affect all sorts of people in very weird ways, and if you have a psychotic break, you're very likely to commit suicide afterwards. Because it's like wild animal takes over your body and your mind. And people can't stand the idea of going back there. There's just no way to find the strength to go back there. So what I see is a woman in this moment of total desperation because she doesn't know if she's going to go back there. And imagine if she goes back there on stage at the Hall of Fame. That was unimaginable. She did not want to lose control again. And Ashley was there, and Ashley, she thought the world of and thought she could handle it.
Right. I mean,
So
I understand all that as well.
yeah,
And that's an interesting perspective because, again, we all come at it personally. So
yeah,
you believe that she really was having a full psychotic break when she made this decision.
she was. And hearing you say that, the part of me wishes that we had used the audio that I heard of what she was going through, except, I really didn't want to go against the family's wishes.
No, there's certain things you can discuss, but you don't really need to hear.
You don't really need to hear. It's really tough to hear. But I think if you heard it, you would agree with me.
Yeah. Where are Wynonna and Ashley now in their relationship? I know you have the scene at the end,
Yeah.
but where are they? Has going through this documentary process brought them closer together? Is there hope that they'll really learn how to support each other? Because it was a family of 3 individuals, not a family.
Yeah. Yeah. What I really learned making this documentary is that Wynonna was functionally, in many ways, Ashley's mother, not Naomi. Wynonna mothered Ashley. And that comes with all the complexity you would think it would come with.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that they get closer, they break apart, they get closer again, just like any mother-daughter pairing.
Right.
That's what I learned about them. And so I feel like every time I turn around, it's something different because they're like a mother-daughter pairing. But the devotion between them is insane. The way they'll show up for each other, the way Ashley will want to talk something through with Y before she decides and vice versa. They're very, very deeply close that way. They're like mother-daughter.
So there is a continual communication between them, that they really still are each other's rocks.
Yeah, as far as I know. I mean, certainly while we were filming, that was the case.
Well, Alexandra, it's fascinating. Sorry, I'm trying to get my paper out of the way. It is absolutely fascinating. The Judd Family, Truth Be Told, airs Saturday, May 10th and Sunday, May 11th on A&E. This has been
And Lifetime. It's actually coming out on Lifetime.
Not on A&E?
No, A&E in partnership with Lifetime, but it's
okay. So let me
let
me rephrase that then.
Yeah.
The Judd Family, Truth Be Told, airs Saturday, May 10th and Sunday, May 11th on Lifetime in conjunction with A&E. Very exciting. Alexandra, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is really a pleasure, Melissa.